Welcome to Mershman Seeds Cup of Joe. On this episode, Ben talks cold weather, frost, rain, and how much nitrogen is needed for side dressing. Thinking about replant, what crops will bounce back and what crops won't. The weather forecast says there's a hot, dry summer coming. What does that mean for crop production in the grain markets? Stick around for Joe's corny joke.
Hi, this is Joe Mershman. Welcome to Mershman Seeds Cup of Joe, episode number 44, season 3. Today we have Turk and Ben, and Ben, lots going on out there in the field. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so if we look back at last week, our northern portion of our territory experienced a little bit of cold weather. The dates for that would have been, it was like a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, that temperatures dipped down. As you move south, the temperatures were in that 39 to 40 range. As you got to northeast Iowa, they dipped down into the 28, 29 degree, and then it got even colder than that as we went west. So we've been fielding pictures, and if you look at this first overlay, we have an example of probably 15 soybean plants lined up in a row next to a pocket knife, and it's a pretty good representation of which beans I believe would have survived versus the beans that probably weren't going to outlive that frost damage. So it's a pretty good representation as you look. There's 3 beans on the left that have active growing points. The cotyledons aren't completely smoked. They still have a little bit of color to them yet, and they still have that active growing point coming out of the secondary growing point coming out of the cotyledons, like what we've talked about this year a couple times, unfortunately, already. Everything to the right of the pocket knife, they're starting to see the brown discoloration. You're starting to see in the cotyledons, you're starting to see the turgidity, the firmness of that plant becomes soft and squishy. And if that's what the stand looks like, if you pulled that out of a 5-foot section or a 6-foot section, if that's representable, you're down to, an eighth of what your actual population is out there. So that's going to warrant a replant. A lot of these places are. It's not the whole field that got affected. It's all the low-lying areas where the frost settles the worst. So I haven't heard of huge, massive where the whole fields get smoked, but there are quite a few acres in the bottoms and the low-lying areas that are going to get replanted.
It's pretty evident difference between tilled and no-tilled, wasn't it?
Yes, the tilled fields seem to make it through a little bit better than the no-till soybean fields. That being said, I also have read a couple articles this week on, as you moved into northwest Iowa, which is a lot heavier corn on corn, where it got cold enough that the corn is actually dead. It moved down below. The corn's only at V3. Most of the time we can make it to V6. And it got cold enough that there's growers that believe that it actually killed the growing point down below ground. So with beans, it seems like this time of year when we have a little bit more heat during the daytime, we can make a decision in 2 to 3 days. With corn, that decision is typically 7 to 10 days because you really have to wait till you start seeing active, that whorl start buggy whipping and pushing its way back out of seeing an active plant growing. So in the north, we're having a few issues that they're gonna be working through. They got started. They've been a little bit dry, but they were actively growing correctly. But it's just not a super happy situation.
Iowa State had a really good article this week talking about how many heat units it took to really make that decision.
Yep.
And that was, 100?
I think it's basically at this stage to make a corn plant grow from in the vegetative stages, it takes like 86 growing degree units per stage. So it wouldn't surprise me if it takes 2 leaves, somewhere between that 80 and 160 growing degree units to push through.
The main thing is don't make the decision the day after. Wait for a couple days to see what we got.
Right, because it's all about that replant episode where we showed the different statistics. It's all about date, population at this point in time on what you could really ruin a nice looking field that looks bad but has the potential to grow out of stuff.
Yeah.
So as we move further south, what we're dealing with south of extreme southeast Iowa and north central Missouri, we're dealing with quite a bit of replant. And that replant stems from completely saturated soils and soybean and corn fields that farmers are finally starting to get back into. It's starting to dry off enough. I think we're going to see a lot of planting happen and replanting happen this the end of this week, moving into the weekend, because I think there's a chance of rain beginning of the week. So there's going to be a lot of corn planting and soybean replanting that's happening. What would cause the majority of these replants falls into completely saturated soils. And we have examples, and we'll overlay this next picture of soybean, our plot here in West Point, where they literally swelled and they didn't do anything after they swelled because they sat in complete saturation for 30, well, it's not quite 30 plus days. It'd be closer to like 20 days. It got warm after saturation, but it just continued on raining, and plants literally need oxygen to put a taproot down. Corn's the same way. We had corn that swelled up, maybe stuck a little radical out, and just didn't move. So what's the number one fastest payback on wet fields, Turk?
Tile.
So this would be a good year to go out and scope those areas that you do have to do replant with, because tile on 30-foot centers, 40-foot centers, 50-foot centers are things that could really have maybe prevented a replant or maybe helped you get out in the field a little bit sooner.
It's not hard to identify where they're at.
Right.
There's an old saying, you're paying for tile whether you have it or not.
That's correct.
So definitely I agree with you on that one, Ben, because locally here, the farmers who have tile and have the high-speed planters, I know one farmer, he got his stuff in April, and his corn and soybeans look great. So, even though those planted around May 2nd seems to be the bad date, for the most part.
Right. So I think we're going to see a lot of progress. It's not widespread. It seems like to be in pockets where where the water sat the longest. So I think we're going to see a lot of progress. And just a hint on, I know we said that we were going to get moving on to the next topic, I know we said we were going to get into doing some nitrate testing. I just started doing that last Thursday. I don't have much update from that point. I pulled soil cores over in west central Illinois on Wednesday, and they were ranging 6 to 8 parts per million. They've had a lot of mineralization. Things looked correct. He wasn't fall applied. He only had about 30 to 40 pounds of nitrogen down. It called for 150 to 160 pounds to raise a 240 bushel, 230 bushel corn crop. So things look good that direction, I don't think, because they haven't had the excessive rainfall. They didn't lose much. They have pretty good mineralization. The corn crop's not yellow. They haven't lost much, but we'll have more to report on next week.
Dry over there?
Conditions were nice. There's a few fields that had some spotty spots, as you like a little bit of what we're dealing with in the lower lying areas, but those were few and far between compared to my travels as we head south and at home here locally. So,
well, Ben, the good news is for the Merschman customers, when they have a problem, like we talked about the frost and we talk about the wet conditions, obviously when the farmers call their dealer, the dealer calls our reps are out in the field immediately. Reps get on the phone, have conversations with you, discussions are made, decisions are made, and then we don't have trucks anymore. We call them engines, like fire engines, engine number 1601, send it out. We got a replant. So immediately when we get that word, we get the seed produced, put it on a truck. Within less than 24 hours, we've got the seed there. So that's one of the advantages of dealing with Merschman Seeds is when customers do have problems, we respond and we get results done as quickly as possible. So our plants right now are all on basically standing by like a fire station, waiting for calls for either first plant seed or replant seed. So if you need more seed, we can get it to you.
And not only that, there's companies out there that don't have. We're hearing reports, and I'm not going to name company X or company Y, but if you started with Enlist beans, they're offering you Liberty or LLGT 27s or Extend to replant with. They're not giving you their Enlist beans back. So, we have the Enlist beans. That's a positive point for working with Merschman Seeds. If that's a trait that you want, that's a trait you're going to get.
That's right. We're going to give you back what you ordered and get it there as fast as we can because, the clock is ticking, and we know that every day means less yield potentially according to the calendar. So that we literally go in hyper mode when somebody has a problem around here. The entire organization becomes alerted and we get to work on it. That brings us to the other subject then. As we talk about frost and how cold it was a few days ago, now, and Turk can talk about it in detail, but according to the long-range forecasts, particularly in the north-central Corn Belt, from into mid-June, they're talking about some ridiculous heat, and potentially 50% of the U.S. corn crop could be under some very acute stress in 2 weeks. So this thing is just, we're getting thrown so many curveballs this year, and what that's going to do to the market, Turk? What do you think?
And so goes the forecast, so goes the market. And as the forecast got hot, not only did it get hot, but the rains over last weekend didn't materialize to the point that everybody thought they would have. And so everybody was just a little bit short on what they thought it was going to get. Good news for some people, bad news for others. But in general, the forecast got hot. It's going to be hot now for going on 2 weeks, at least what we can see right now. And so the markets have responded accordingly, and with the first hot and drier forecast. Drier is kind of the name of the game here at this time of year anyway. But as we get into hotter and drier, those areas that need rain are probably not going to get as much as they want, and the people that don't want rain, this hot is going to cause some concerns as well, because again, putting seed into really hot conditions can create its own set of problems. Make sure that you got it getting it planted deep enough, because it'll dry out really quick over top of that seed slot. And I can't stress that enough, as you're going out, and don't always get it into moisture, well into moisture this time of year when we got a forecast like we've got right now. But yeah, the markets are responding, and we've recovered this week. We've recovered half of what we've lost top to bottom. So we're halfway back to the top. We'll see where we go from here, but as I've said before, I don't see any reason for this market to fall out of bed until we get well in to see what kind of a crop we've got growing for next year.
Yeah, there's just a lot of problems out there, but somewhere in between has to be the sweet spot, because the extreme dry conditions are to the north, and then we got extreme wet. And I know Missouri's still struggling. A lot of soybeans to be planted in Missouri, and some of the and corn, and some of the crops that are planted have to be replanted. So we're kind of in the Missouri section, in other words, from the standpoint of just been way too wet, particularly northern half of Missouri. But I agree. The fireworks is coming, and if we don't get timely rains, and again, we can take some stress now, because we've seen some really good yields in dry Junes. I mean, we've seen some fantastic yields in dry Junes, but come pollination time for corn, what's the critical elements then?
Gotta have moisture.
Gotta have moisture.
And cool weather. And
that's when the corn plant uses, the demand for moisture is at the peak at pollination. Mm-hmm. Soybeans, we got till pod fill time, so we got some time, because even in a year like 1988, we still had 40 bushel soybeans when we virtually had no rain through most of the summer. But it rained, like my grandpa Mettenberg used to say, just in time. And made a difference.
There's also things you can do for that, for that pollination period. If your soils are depleted in certain nutrients, you're not drought proofing your corn. So if you have low potassium levels, if you're not hitting your 5% base saturation, or if you're not working towards 5% base saturation, if you don't have boron levels where they're supposed to be, if you're not side dressing with boron, if you don't have zinc levels that are adequate, all of those elements help weatherproof that corn crop, because they pull more water in trying to pull the potassium, they pull more water in trying to pull the boron in, and they're pulling more and more water, and they're not getting the nutrients they want, and they're just extremely inefficient at that point. So having high fertility fields is actually a really, really smart idea when you're coming to drought proofing corn.
Yep.
Very good. Well, I got some help on my corny jokes this week. John McKillop, my brother-in-law, of course, most of you remember John McKillop. He was our controller, retired a little over a year ago. So he sent a couple in, and I appreciate it, John. Appreciate the help. Obviously, I need it. Okay, this one here is, when is a door not a door? When is a door not a door? When it's ajar. Okay? Now think about that, okay? All right, now you folks that are into exercise and everything, no, not everybody's into exercise, but how do lazy people exercise? They do diddly squats.
Yeah.
I'm the only one laughing. I don't get this. Well, thanks for watching this week. We sincerely appreciate your business. Hope you and your family are healthy and safe. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Mershman Seeds Cup of Joe. Make sure you're subscribed to all of our platforms so that you don't miss future episodes.